Lieutenant Cecil, and on behalf of Susie Spittler and Tom Beck, I want to welcome you to the 24th oral history taping. It is Monday, November the 11th, 2013. It is Veterans Day, and tonight we're going to hear from a few of our local veterans. We want to thank them and honor them for their service to our country. And to all veterans from all wars, we say thank you for your commitment, your sacrifice, and your courage. Our first speaker is Kenny Kauffman, and he will start us out. Okay. Kenny.
Well, I am Kenny Kauffman. I got a letter from the Miami County Draft Board to be at the bus in Troy to get a free ride to Fort Hays, Columbus. I passed my physical on the February 15th, 1945. They asked me what branch of service I wanted. I said the United States Army. They bused me back to Camp Adbury, Indiana for a short time, then bused me to Camp Fannin in Texas for my 6 weeks training. They sent me back to Dayton, Ohio on 1 week of furlough. Then they bused me to Camp Adair, Oregon for a short time. The next camp was at Camp Stoneman, California. There they put hundreds of veterans on a big 3-deck ship. Took 21 days to get over to Manila, the Philippine island. We had just another week to go, and they got word the Japanese surrendered. The war was over. The Philippines at Manila was all blown up. Sailboats was destroyed. Dead Japanese was still on the deck. They sent our shipload of veterans to South Korea at Yosu. Okay, I lost credit. I was in South Korea for 1.5 years. My job there was military police. Get the Japanese out of Korea, put them on a train, and send them back home to Japan. I was military police. I guess that's all I got. Oh, wait a minute. Got some on back. Okay. They asked if anyone could cut hair. I said I sheared sheep on the farm. They said you got the job to be the barber. I didn't charge anything. They gave me $1 or 50 cents. Our outhouse was 3 50-gallon drums with the tops cut out, except the top one where your butt sat had a small hole in it about the size of your rear end. You didn't sit there too long on cold weather to read the newspaper. The outhouse was a good 100 feet up the hill. You walked up and slid down the hill. So I guess that's my story. So, okay, take over my job.
Thanks, Uncle Kenny. My name is Scott Fogle, and I joined the Air Force back in 1987. I was in the Air Force active duty for 10 years until 1997, and I was on reserve duty for 3 years after that time frame. When I was getting ready to join the Air Force, I was a little guy, okay? I had no discipline whatsoever. I was getting in a lot of trouble when I was in high school my senior year, and I thought, you know what, this is the best thing for me is to join the military, because I'd never been away from home, never been on an airplane, And so I thought, okay, this is the thing I'm going to do. My dad was in the Air Force, and that's what I needed to do, was to join the Air Force. Well, I almost didn't make it, because when I went to the MEP station, like I said, it was a little guy when I went to high school. And what they told me when I went to my original enlistment that I needed to gain some weight, because I only weighed 111 pounds. And they said I had to weigh 112 pounds to get into the Air Force. Well, when I went to the MEP station in Cincinnati, I weighed 111 pounds. So they had to give me a 1 pound weight waiver to join the Air Force when I went into a basic training. So that's how it all started on October 23rd of 1987. I went to Lackland Air Force Base, Texas for my basic training. It was 6 weeks long, and I went in open general. So I got to pick a list of 8 jobs that I thought I would like to do while I was in the Air Force. Well, when I got my jobs, they gave it to me and said, "You're going to be a cop. You're going to be security police." And I couldn't believe it, because I thought, what? This little guy is going to be a security policeman, a police officer in the Air Force? But it turned out great. I loved every minute of it. I stayed at Lackland Air Force Base for another 8 weeks for tech school, and I became a law enforcement journeyman. Once I became a law enforcement journeyman, these were the proud hats that we wore when I was in the Air Force. So not many folks got a chance to wear these, only special forces and cops in the military. So that was my hat. After that, we went to Fort Dix, New Jersey, and I went through an air-based ground defense training. It was like combat ground skills for the Air Force. We learned everything that the Army learned in a 4-week time period. We were taught by the Army. Funny story to tell you, when I went to the Chow Hall, in the Air Force, we were coddled because we had the best of everything. We had great dorm rooms, we had great food, we had the best of everything. Our Air Force bases were all very modern, and when I went to I was the first one in the Chow Hall line, and I went up and I asked the lady, I said, "I'd like a ham and cheese omelet, some pancakes, French toast, and biscuits and gravy." And she looked at me and she started laughing and she said, "Son, you're at an Army base now. You got eggs, you got bacon, you got hash browns. What do you want?" So that's what I had to deal with for 4 weeks while I was at Fort Dix, New Jersey. After I left Fort Dix, I went to Griffiths Air Force Base, which was in Rome, New York. And it was a nice place, but I just couldn't handle the winter. I had 2 winters there, and I remember the first year I was there, it was somewhere close to around the 4th of July, and the last bit of snow melted on the flight line. So when that happened, I said, okay, it's time to get out of here, time to go someplace else. So I put in to go overseas. But one thing, another story I got to tell you, this was really interesting. There was a guy that was stationed at Griffiths Air Force Base, and he was also a cop. And there was 2 different sets of cops. There was law enforcement and there was security. I was law enforcement, he was flight line security. His name was Jeff Phillips. He graduated a year before me from Milton. Well, we both were working together one night, and we were working together on an uploaded B-52. It had nukes on it, and we were on the flight line at Griffiths Air Force Base. He was on the front of the plane. I was on the back of the plane. So I thought, isn't that something that you got 2 guys from Milton Union High School, from West Milton, that are working an uploaded B-52 on the base at Griffiths Air Force Base. That was a really neat thing. And we messed with each other all night, just like you would in school too. So it was a lot of fun. I was on the elite gate guard section while I was at Griffiths, and I was also a patrolman. And on the elite gate guard section, it was really neat because you worked as a gate guard for 6 hours, and that was all you did. But you had to have your uniform in tip-top shape. You wore an ascot, you wore white gloves, you wore the boots with the white laces, and you just stood on the gate for 6 hours at a time. So either 6 in the morning till noon or noon till 6. Like I said, I had enough of Griffiths with the snows in the winter, so I put in for a new duty assignment, and I went to RAF Greenham Common, which was in the United Kingdom, and I lived about an hour outside west of London. And while I was over there, I worked at a nuclear munitions storage dump. I worked as a gate guard and a patrolman, and worked something unique when I was at the munitions storage dump. We had a lot of fence line, and we had a lot of problems with peace activists. Women would they would camp outside the gates because they were always protesting the Americans being there in the United Kingdom. So we were always worried that they were always cutting our fences and coming onto the base and trying to do damage and different things. So I was on an ATV four-wheeler, and that's what I rode around the perimeter of the fence for 8 hours at a time. So it was a lot of fun. It was really a good deal, especially when you're 19 years old and you're just over there riding around on an ATV for 8 hours during a shift. Now, when I was over there at the Gulf War, when I was over in England, that's when the Gulf War had kicked off, and I never will forget it because it was a midnight shift, and it was a little bit after 12 o'clock at night in England, and I was working with a Ministry of Defense police officer, so he was an English police officer. Every American security policeman was on the gate with Ministry of Defense police officer. And I wanted to show, this is the Stars and Stripes. That was the day that the war erupted in Iraq. So wanted to bring that and show that. The other thing that I was able to do while I was at RAF Greenham Common is I was selected to attend the last Bob Hope tour that he had overseas. He came to RAF Mildenhall, and they put us on a bus in uniform. My mom taped it and sent it over to me, and I saw myself on TV, so that was pretty neat in the crowd. But I got a chance to see Bob Hope in his last USO tour. And then, of course, while I was there at RAF Greenham Common, that's when the war ended as well. They had the ceasefire in the Gulf War, and that was the paper from the Stars and Stripes when they had that. Unfortunately, the base, since we had the drawdown with the military in the Cold War era, that base was closing. They were getting rid of the ground-launched cruise missiles, and what happened was they came in and they told all of us we had to go to a different base, either in the States or overseas. Well, I hadn't had enough time overseas. I'd only been there for 2 years, so I said, let me go over to Germany because my brother was there. So I got an assignment to Kaiserslautern, Germany, and very unique tour because I got selected for U.S. Forces Police Force. And this was a town patrol with the Army. So every day there was an Army MP and an Air Force SP that was in a patrol car together. We had over 700 square miles of patrolling area in our jurisdiction. And while I was there, I was a desk sergeant, I was a gate guard, and I was a patrolman. We had roughly about 150,000 Americans in this area that I worked in. It was between Ramstein and Kaiserslautern, Germany, and like I said, there was about 150,000 Americans, so they said it was the largest contingent of Americans outside the continental U.S. So it was pretty amazing. After that, I was there for 2 years. I had a great time in Germany. I loved it. My parents were able to come over there and visit. Had other friends and family from West Milton that were able to come over and visit. But I'd been overseas for 4 years, so I decided it was time to go back to the States, and I got an assignment to Vandenberg Air Force Base, California. So I couldn't have been any luckier in my Air Force career because I was in New York on the East Coast, I was in California on the West Coast, and then I spent time in England and Germany. And while I was overseas, one thing I forgot to say is I was very lucky because I got a chance to go to 11 different countries while I was overseas stationed in England and Germany, which if I would have stayed here in West Milton, I would have never been able to go to 11 different countries, that's for sure. So when I was at Vandenberg, it was a Space Command that I worked for, and we had missile launches there. We had 26 miles of beach on the base, and I worked as a gate guard, a patrolman, a desk sergeant, and that's when I finally got my office job, my first office job toward the end of my career. And that's where I separated from the Air Force. I separated in October of 1997, and I didn't want to get out of the government, so after that time frame, I stayed there, and I got a job as a federal correctional officer, and I've continued my time with the government. I've got 26 years now with the government. I bought 10 years back from the Air Force, and I've got 16 years civil service, and I currently work at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So I started my career in 1987 with the Air Force, and now hopefully in the next maybe 5 to 10 years, I'll end my career with the Air Force, and how fitting. So one other thing I'd like to say is that, my dad, myself, my brother have lots of uncles. My Uncle Kenny, he was in the military. My Uncle Herbie, he's a World War II veteran as well. I have cousin Monty and Mitchell Fogle. We were just able today to go out together and have lunch, veterans meal, at the Texas Roadhouse together. So it's really great that we're able to still do that. My Uncle Kenny here, he's 88, soon to be 89, and my Uncle Herbie is 90 years old.
I'm an old man.
That's good though. And hopefully my little guy that's sitting here in the audience, hopefully he'll follow his dad one day and he'll join the Air Force too, because I think it's a great thing. It was great for me because I got a lot of discipline. Like I said, I'd never been away from home, never been on an airplane, so it taught me a lot. I definitely wouldn't be the man I am today if I wouldn't have joined the military. Gave me an education. I used my GI Bill to get my bachelor's degree. I wouldn't be in the job I'm in today if I didn't get that. So the military has done a lot for me. And one last thing I'd like to show you. This is how much we change over time. This is my basic training picture when I went in 1987. And you can see this is a before and after. Granted, if I took that hat off there, I didn't have very much hair back then, but I had a heck of a lot more than what I got now. So, but thank you very much, and I'm going to turn things over to Preston Mote.
Thank you. Start with, I like to thank the people that puts this on all the time. Barb, Susie, Thomas. It's a great thing for the community. Maybe our grandkids will get a kick out of it when they go back and start looking at it, I started out a whole lot like Kenny did. We met the bus on the square in downtown Troy, right in front of the yellow cab taxi booth. Went on down to Cincinnati for physicals. And the same day, then we went on down to Fort Knox. It was a pretty long day. Of course, when you're young, you don't really realize how long the days they are. Stayed in Fort Knox and took my basic training. And it seemed like I always had trouble getting started. Every time I moved, so got sick about the fourth day I was in basic training, ended up in the hospital for a couple of months. So that kind of cut that short. Got out of the hospital, they couldn't send me anywhere where I had to eat in a mess hall, so they had to keep me close to the hospital. So they put me in a tank battalion. And we were just bringing in the M60 tanks at that time. They was diesels. Before that, they had gas. So I worked as a mechanic in a motor pool, and they found out I knew about diesel engines, so they made me an instructor. And I was an instructor there until I healed up good enough that they could move me on to another location. So while we was there, this was supposed to be a secured motor pool because of the new electronics that was coming out of the tanks. We had 2 guards that got killed on guard duty in the middle of the night. And the final report come out on, the guards got killed by some men that was stealing gas out of our diesel tanks. So do the figures on that one. Okay, that was about the end of my tour in Fort Knox. I got to stay there for one winter. We had one of them nasty ice storms. And they decided to take one of our tank retrievers and use it for a snow plow. Well, there was a hill there, and nobody ever thought about turning any of the tracks around, so they was running on rubber tires, and it smashed 7 cars before it got stopped at the bottom of the hill. Okay, so after that, I got my orders to go to Korea. By that time, I was a sergeant. Got a little time home before we shipped out to Korea. Pretty long flight. Had to go to SeaTac first. Sat there for about 7 hours, get on another plane to go to Kempo Air Base. Got over to Korea, it was fogged in. So we flew around there, we about got out of the field and decided we'd go to Japan. So I ended up spending just about a week in Japan at the Tokyo Hilton Hotel. Really plush. After we got off the plane, they told us, well, we're having problems here, you're not allowed to wear military uniform. You gotta wear civilian uniforms if you leave your rooms. So we had to go shopping. So we had to buy the clothes out of the clothes store in the hotel. And thank goodness the military picked up the cost of the clothes. So about 4 or 5 days later, we finally got clearance, so we go fly on into Kempo. You know, we still landed in the Fogle, so it didn't matter. We might as well landed there the first day. They was trying a new medicine that was supposed to keep you from getting malaria and all kind of good things. The hemoglobin shots. Anybody ever get them? Look about like a syringe you use on a steer. You know, they put 100 cc's in each cheek. Then they put us on the back of a deuce and a half on gravel roads and took us up to this was in Kempo Air Base, so they took us about 90 miles to our regular post on gravel roads. That was a real enjoyable ride. Kind of bruised and beat up. So we got up there, and there was, it was an outpost on the DMZ, pretty close to Freedom Bridge. And it was kind of a beat up looking place. Almost put you in mind of Nashville Junkyard. Walked in the motor pool, and there was trucks sitting on blocks of wood and tires missing off of them, and windshields missing out of half of them. Here they cannibalized a lot of the trucks when they broke down to put the parts on the trucks that was still runnable. Come to find out, it was having a shortage of parts, which I kind of understood because Vietnam was going on pretty strong on the 10th offensive, about the same time I was getting to Korea. But that's not the way the military is supposed to be run. The unit I got assigned to was the supply and transportation for a whole division, which is just about 30,000 troops. So we had food reefers, or, you know, refrigerated semis, all the food and all the supplies, all the gas, whatever it takes to maintain the military goes through this compound. And we had, you know, trucks, trailers, reefers, comm trucks, generators, the whole thing. Railhead, small railroad engine to push the cars around. And we just couldn't get parts. So I kind of loafed around there. You might call it scoping out the territory. And every one of the sergeants in charge of like the supply company and the food, they was all having the same trouble. They was ordering stuff and they was only getting half their order. Maybe the next day they'd only get a third of their order. So after we got settled in, here I'm supposed to be a motor sergeant, and they didn't have any tools for me. I had to use tools out of the privates' toolboxes to start working on the trucks. So we found us a good truck that we could depend on. We started sending him out every day to go down to the Air Force Base and scrounge parts. So we got pretty lucky. We started trading stuff back and forth and got most of our trucks done. But there was about 40% of the vehicles on that base was deadlined when I got there. And within 3 months we only had like a 2 to 3% deadline rate. But we wasn't getting the parts like we should have. So everybody was blaming the Koreans for stealing the parts. They called them slicky boys. You know, they'd steal your radio and let the music play. You know, they'd put a little dinky transistor radio on your nightstand and take your big Sony out. But they wasn't doing that with the parts. So we kept working on that. Finally, we started meeting with the mayors of the surrounding towns around Moonsonee, because a lot of their people worked on the base to unload rail cars. Where we was short on GIs, we'd use Third Nationals. And we got to know the Koreans pretty well. And to get to know the people that actually worked for us, that was Koreans, actually treated us better when they found out we was intermingling with their people, eating their food. And first time I ate any Korean food, I was sitting there, and this waitress comes out and she puts this great big white towel around my neck, and a little water there and the thing. After I took the first bite of that kimchi, I knew why it was so hot. Your nose would get numb. So it took time to learn how to eat the Korean food. You've been there. Yeah. But that all worked in our favor as we made friends with them. We wasn't near as bad as what they thought we was. So then the next thing we did, we figured out if we kept our repair shop open 24 hours a day, we could give our other people in that group better service. So we had to make friends with the mess sergeant, so he made sure the mess hall was open for our night crews, because we was trading crews 3 times a day. Had some pretty good guys. And at that time, we probably had more draftees than what we did enlisted men. But the draftees come from all walks of life. So we had to pick of the best people in the United States. Each one had their own special thing, like bulldozer operators from the coal mines, truck drivers from the Rocky Mountains, mechanics that knew how to work on this stuff. And then we had the guys that had enlisted that had their PhDs and everything to run the offices and take care of the paperwork. So it worked out real well. The 24-hour maintenance worked out real good. It actually gave our guys more time off than when we just trying to work through the day. So after we got the deadline down to where it was livable, we had a monsoon about washed all of our roads out, so a lot of our people turned in to be road graders and bulldozer operators, and we had to get our sand out of the river to keep the roads patched. And then the Koreans would sneak across and put landmines on the roads every night, and so every day you had to go out and sweep the roads so the generals wouldn't get blowed up, things like that. Had to take care of the upper echelon. And then every time you had a monsoon, it'd wash all the landmines out of the mountains and wash them down into the rice paddies. So weekends we didn't have anything to do, we'd go out and help the Koreans fish out the landmines out of the rice paddies just to have something to do. But other than that, Korea was kind of a hard place to be, because summertime you get up 70 days, in wintertime that wind to come out of China about 40 below zero. If you want your truck to start the next morning, you better take your batteries out of the truck and take them to bed with you, because they'd freeze. You was down south, you missed that. Yeah. But come to find out, after all this time, we've still running short of parts. And that's when the Koreans decided they was going to hijack our Pueblo intelligence ship. So that extended everybody until that conflict was over. This took us into the 2nd year. So during that 2nd year that we was babysitting the North Koreans in the DMZ, Freedom Bridge, we got a line on what happened to our parts, and it come from within our own people. They had set up a black market operation NCOs, enlisted men, privates, corporals. Well, there was some bars in the group, and it went clear up to Washington, D.C., to the sergeant major of the Army. Most all of them that got caught got at least 30 years. Some of them's not been out too long. Some of them even died while they was in prison. And that solved the supply problem. After that, we had the supplies like they should. Everybody operated like they should. I don't know if it ever helped the relationship on the DMZ. Some days you could talk to the guards on the other side of the fence, and some days you couldn't. So that was about the time that we rotated back to the United States. Hadn't been home for a couple of years, so it was time to see the family. Got stationed at Fort Riley, Kansas, and just about 9 months later, my son Kevin was born. Figure that, okay? So we stayed there. He was a preemie baby, so we had to stay a little bit longer than while we'd really planned. And I'd already had my orders cut to go to Germany. So we had a stack of orders every time we think we was ready to go. We couldn't go, so we had to cancel them orders, get another, and it looked like Webster Dictionary time we got out of there. Moved home here to Laura, Union Township. Stayed here about 3 or 4 weeks, and wife Sandy and Renee and Kevin stayed here at home, and I went on over to Frankfurt, Germany. No, I forgot. While we was in Fort Riley, Kansas, I was a motor sergeant at a Bailey Bridge Company in a dry state. Now, who in the world wants to build Bailey Bridges in Kansas? Well, come to find out, that was the easiest place to train, because nobody had ever drowned. You just get run over by the sand and everything else, and rattlesnakes. But that's about all we did out there, was build a Bailey Bridge out in the middle of the desert somewhere. And that's also when General Eisenhower passed away. And we had his funeral and his burial there at Aberdeen, Kansas, at the library. So our guys in that unit set up the helipads for all the dignitaries coming in from all over the world. And that was about the highlight of that stay out there. And then we moved back to Ohio for 3 weeks to get ready to go to Germany. So I left for Germany ahead of my wife and the kids so we could find a good place to live, and got into government quarters. They was actually old German quarters that they'd used for the military, and they was 3.5 stories high, and our first apartment was in the attic, and it used to be maid quarters. There was 8 bedrooms to this one apartment. We only needed 3. But that was a stepping stone into getting into a 3rd-story apartment after we was there for a while. I got assigned to a signal battalion as a motor sergeant, and the signal battalion was a high security battalion, and it was kind of like the Cold War eavesdroppers. Whatever was going on, these guys were stationed all up and down the Iron Curtain, and so we had generators scattered out over a big area to where our maintenance men had to service them on a regular basis. And in the wintertime, it was a problem getting gasoline out to run these generator stations because of the snow. And we fooled around one day getting up this mountain 7 or 8 hours. And after we got up there and got the gasoline there, we looked over the other side of the mountain, and there was a German resort ski area with blacktop roads going right up there, and we was only 150 yards away from it. But that was the way we had to do it. We had to stay where we were supposed to be. And all this was set up in 1969. We was getting ready to actually put in orbit our first military communication satellite, which ended up to be 3 satellites so that you didn't lose contact at any one time. You'd pick up one satellite, next one would come in and pick up. So the 4 years that we was there, we worked a lot with ASA, Army Security, in setting up the power system for their satellite communication systems. Up until then, we used the underground cables that went through England that had been put in back in the 1920s, which are still being used today. And when that first satellite transmission went through, nobody thought it worked. When they turned it on, it was just dead quiet. There was no static. And finally, this guy says, "Hello?" Yeah. Some private on the other side of the world. He didn't know who he was talking to, and we didn't know who we was talking to. But it made a good communication system, which is still in use today. And we had good field duty. He was on for a couple days. He was off for a couple days. Motor pool was World War II and World War I German buildings. They was steam heated. About every 6 or 8 blocks where we lived at was an incinerator that burned all the trash and also furnished the hot water to heat all the barracks and all the military housing. So the only thing we had to buy our food, and we was only getting paid then once a month. So we figured out we bought food on the last week of the month instead of waiting until everybody got their check on the first week of the month. It worked out a lot better. And we had all modern equipment. We had the latest in the diesel type engines. It was multi-fuel engines, running on any fuel you could put them. And all the styles of generators you could ever think of, we had them there at that one. So we had quite a bit of vacation time left. You got 30 days vacation for every year you was in the military. And it worked out that I had 12 months vacation coming to me last year I was there. Because we moved so quick that my paperwork didn't catch up with me. And we didn't really need time off in Korea or here in the States. We just left it accumulate. And after my 2 years up, I re-enlisted for 4, and they gave me 2 extra months of leave time for re-upping, you call it. So we got back to the States, and we got discharged out of the military at Fort Dix, New Jersey. Then I joined the National Guard up at Covington. I had got my stripes so quick that you had to have so many years of time in service before you could get another stripe. And the way Vietnam was going, I thought there might be a chance of getting called back in the Army, so I joined the National Guard to get more time in to lock in my rank. So the last big hoorah of my military career was we spent a week over at the Xenia tornado. We took communications and mess halls over to Xenia, set up 24-hour mess hall service for the people, had all the telephone hookups you could use over there, and we wasn't allowed to use them because we'd take the jobs away from the civilians. So that's what we run into about every country we went to, we run into that problem. So that's, it was a good life. I can't say I would do it exactly the same as I did it the first time, but it was sure an experience and a learning experience, just like he said. Thanks for listening. Bill, cheers.
All right, thank you. Again, my name's Bill Klepinger. My experience is a little different than the rest of the people on this panel. And what I mean by that is my 3.5 years was all stateside. And it started out by enrolling at Ohio State, going to college. And at that time at Ohio State, about every freshman and sophomore at Ohio State went through the ROTC program. And after your sophomore year, you had the option as to whether you wanted to commit to a military commitment or drop your military commitment at that time. And being at that time, we had a draft, and my number was fairly low. And so I said, I'm going to go ahead and volunteer for the Army. So I spent 4 years of ROTC at Ohio State. And upon graduation, then while I was there even, I was able to sign up for flight school. And so at that time, I made a commitment to be a helicopter pilot. And Ohio State trained me to fly a fixed-wing airplane while I was there. And between my junior and senior year, we went through a basic summer camp. Like the rest of you went through a basic camp. We went during our junior and senior year. And so after graduation, well, I shouldn't say that. After I had my coursework done, I still needed to do student teaching. And at that time, ag teachers were shortage of ag teachers in the state of Ohio. So I applied for a delayed entry so that I could do my student teaching and also put in a year of teaching agriculture at Graham High School. And so then in June of '71, I got my commission as first lieutenant, and my first duty station was Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And again, I was back in school, going through the artillery school at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And lasted about 3 months, 4 months, something like that. And not sure what they were going to do with me. And they said, well, we're going to assign you to a Pershing missile unit as a maintenance officer. And I thought, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I've got a college degree, an education degree. I went through artillery school, but I knew nothing about maintenance, and I needed somebody like you. And the first thing I did is I pulled the sergeant aside and I said, you an honest man? He said, yeah. And I said, do you know what you're doing? He said, yeah. And I said, okay, I'm counting on you to do what's right, what's supposed to be done, because I knew nothing about it. And there's a lot of paperwork that went along with that. And that was the hard part, is, which form did this, which form was that. And I was counting on him to take care of it. He did, okay? But I was only there a month. And about that time, I started to learn what I was supposed to do and how to do it. And at that time, I got orders to go to flight school at Fort Walters, Texas. And that was in Mineral Wells. And I spent I think 4 months there learning to fly a helicopter. And the helicopters at that time didn't have autopilot. And what they have today, I'm not sure, but I know they got a lot more than what we had. And when you got in a helicopter, you used both hands, both feet, and so you had one hand on the cyclic, one hand on the collective, and the other 2 feet were controlling the rudder. And I can remember from the get-go, I thought, I drove tractors when I was on the farm, and I fly a fixed-wing airplane, won't be a problem. And you get in there, and the instructor says, okay, we're going to take you up. He says, I'll handle the collective and the rudder. You do the cyclic. And I said, oh, okay. And I was going back and forth, and I was going sideways, and I was only controlling one of them. And so as time went on, you caught on, and he went through each one, and there was a lot of flopping around going on there for a long time. And so at Fort Walters, we learned basically to fly the helicopter, to do some navigation and that type of thing. I do have a story. We had two at that time. I think we were still friendly, but I think we were 2 pilots from Iraq in our class, in our flight class. And I'll never forget, we went on, we had to go cross country to do navigation, and you did it as a team. And for some reason, they put the 2 Iraqis in the same helicopter. And they didn't know what they were doing. So they flew, and they finally said, we got to stop and ask. So there's a funeral going on at a cemetery. So they landed at the funeral to get directions how to get back to Fort Walters. So it wasn't a good idea at all. So I spent about 4 months there, learned to fly the TH-55, and then I got transferred to Fort Ruckert, Alabama, at Enterprise, Alabama, at Fort Ruckert. And at that time, then we went through instrument training and learned to fly the Hueys. So I spent 5 months there learning to do that kind of thing. And instruments was tough because of the unknown. You know, there's a thing called vertigo, and when you're in a cloud, you don't know which way's up. And the Hueys was a pleasure to fly. I really enjoyed flying the Hueys. Being that I was the only field artillery officer in my flight class, and I was a helicopter pilot, I thought, I'll be going to Vietnam. And I was scheduled to get married August the 5th to Kenny Kauffman's daughter. And I thought, oh, I'm going to get married and I'm going to be off to Vietnam. So I called the Pentagon and they said, you know, we don't have any allocations for Vietnam. They said, where would you like to go in the United States? I said, you're kidding. I said, no, where do you want to go? And I said, how about Fort Lewis, Washington? So Bev and I got married August 5th, and about that time, well, my best friend, Keith Kauffman, who's sitting in the audience, he says, hey, Karma Joe and I are going to get married 3 weeks later. I'd like for you to be my best man. I said, I've already applied for I don't know how many delays. I said, I guess I can apply for one more. So I applied for another 3 weeks delay to go to Fort Lewis, Washington, so that I could be his best man in his wedding. And so Bev and I took off to Fort Lewis, Washington, and I was assigned to a 9th Division artillery out there, and I was assigned to a aviation support unit. And at that time, we didn't have GPS, and the artillery targets that you were trying to hit had to be adjusted. And so you either had to have a forward observer or somebody up in the helicopter adjusting that fire, either, you know, add or subtract, left or right, whatever the case may be. To do. So that was one of our missions as the aviation unit is to adjust artillery fire and support the unit, whatever type of movement you needed to do. And so I spent a little over 2 years out there in that 9th Division artillery, supporting them, flying helicopters. And then at that time, I asked for discharge so that I could go back into teaching. And so, like I said before, a little different path than everybody else here has taken. So, okay, turn it over to Dennis Albaugh.
Thank you, Bill. I'm Dennis Albaugh. Spent 20 years, 7 months, and 28 days as in the United States Air Force. Retired as a Master Sergeant. And must say that was the best choice I ever made in my life, was to join the Air Force. Getting started, going through the process, it was kind of new to me, but they'd asked for some different documentation before they were going to let me in. You know, your medical records, dental records, your birth certificate, social security card, those types of things. So I says, okay. Well, my dad kept all those things in his filing cabinet. So I get home and I ask him, Dad, where's my birth certificate? And he says, what, are they doubting you were ever born? And I says, well, I don't think so, but they still need it. So I took it up, and then this had kind of pondered on my mind a little bit. So I asked the recruiter, I says, why do I need a birth certificate? And I said, are you doubting that I was born? He said, oh, no. We just want to make sure that you're a U.S. citizen before we let you serve in the military. Oh, that's fair enough. That makes perfect sense to me. So anyway, passed all that, went through the physical. That wasn't a problem. And off to basic training in April of 1987. Wasn't any real problem there. It was quite interesting to me, coming from a small town like West Milton, where we don't have a lot of diversity in our cultures compared to what I met when I got down to Lackland Air Force Base. And there were different nationalities, I mean, all over, probably, I would say, at least 30 of the states were represented, and many, many different nationalities. But the one thing that we held in common was the fact that we were all American citizens coming together as Common Core. And heard some of these other gentlemen talking about being drafted in. By the time I got there, it was an all-volunteer force, and it still is today. And the draft was there for a reason, but statistics have shown all-volunteer force is simply a little stronger force because I want to be here, I'm not forced to be here. So that was very beneficial. Anyway, got through basic training, went through my technical training at Chanute Air Force Base in Illinois. I was in the aerospace ground equipment career field. We have a lot of acronyms in the Air Force, so we throw AGE onto that, Aerospace Ground Equipment. And what that career field does, it maintains the equipment that they use on the aircraft when it's on the ground, doing their ground testing, providing electrical power, air conditioning, heating. We also work on bomb lifts. We have hydraulics, pump testing systems, generators, pretty diverse field. Some of this aircraft, some of the aircraft could use just about any equipment. I'm saying that wrong. Some of our equipment could be applied to almost any aircraft, but there were some aircraft out there that did require specific equipment, and we'd have to learn that as well. It depended a lot on which base you went to as to what equipment they would need. Graduated after 4 months of training there, and my first duty assignment was at Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota. This is the home of the B-1 bomber, which had recently been brought online. They started developing it in 1960s, and then it was put on hold for a while, and Ronald Reagan says, no, you guys have been working on this plane, we're going to bring it alive, and alive they did. And it was so interesting because it had the conventional capability as well as a nuclear capability. And with nuclear, as Scott mentioned, there's a lot of security goes around nuclear weapons. And so that was kind of exciting to be involved with that at Ellsworth. And we had like 2 legs of the nuclear deterrent triad, which was the missiles out in the ground, buried all up around the northern tier, and then the B-1 bomber as well. We also had some B-52s there, KC-135s that did the aerial refueling. I didn't know they did that before I joined the Air Force, so I learned a whole lot really quick. I remember I was raised on a farm, those of you who know me. Had a good 6 years at Ellsworth. Saw a couple small temporary duty assignments. We went down to support what I call as a red flag down at Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas, Nevada. Red flag is like kind of like the Top Gun games. You've all seen the movie Top Gun. Kind of the Air Force's version of that, where the pilots get out there and do the competing against each other. So that was kind of an eye-opener to me because I'd never been experienced with any of that before. October of 1993, I got orders earlier. I left in October '93, headed over to Kunsan, Korea, spent a year on a remote assignment, and mainly supporting F-16s over there and keeping North Korea at bay, if you will. They like to stir things up a little bit, and it hasn't changed much since the 50s. I don't know that it will ever change. But when my year was up there on November 3rd of 1994, I proceeded down to Florida, where I took my next assignment at Hurlburt Field, Florida, which was Special Operations Command. And that was exciting times for me. My wife hated it because I was gone just about as much as I was home, but I got to see some really neat places and traveled, and we did some really good things. Special ops is there. A lot of the missions are secretive, but we got to work with the Navy SEALs and the Army Rangers and all those Delta Force and all those types of special things that makes life rather interesting for you. You'd always hear some neat stories. Myself got to go to Italy a couple times in support of what was going on in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I probably mispronounced that. Bosnian Serbs over there doing some pretty mean things. We were helping refugees get away from that. So again, aerospace ground equipment, we work as mechanics. We're kind of behind the scenes. We don't see a lot of the frontline stuff, so it may not be exciting. You may not read about us much in the history books, but without us, the aircraft don't get off the ground. So again, we stay home, send our officers off to do the battle. And I'd also went back to Korea, this time only for 3 weeks as a part of that special ops mission. We were over there, and I got a chance to go flying on what's called an AC-130 gunship. It's a C-130 cargo aircraft that has a howitzer cannon and a couple other guns mounted on it. And 105 millimeter howitzer, it's a shell about this big around. They'll fire that thing in the air, and they're pretty good, pretty accurate with it as well. So that was a pretty fascinating opportunity to get to do that. After I spent 4 years there, the Air Force was coming through some drawdowns. They are always changing. The manning requirements is always fluctuating. I was quite content being in the career field I was in, but they gave me basically an ultimatum. You can change career fields, retrain into something new after you've put in. Now, at this point, I put in 10 years at about, when that message came out. And I says, well, I really don't want to change career fields. I got a lot invested into this one. They said, or you can separate from the military. I said, man, are those my only options? And they said, well, there is one other thing you can put in to be an instructor. That wasn't something that was really in the forefront of my mind, but it did allow me to stay in the career field, give me a 4-year window. Then after that, I'd come right back into my career field. And so I said, well, that sounds like the best option for me. And sometimes we don't know what's the best thing for us until we've actually experienced it. And becoming an instructor was truly one of the highlights of my experience. I spent 4 years at Shepherd Air Force Base, where I got the chance to teach and to train the young people coming through on the basics of how to work on our equipment and the fundamentals and those types of things. But after being there for a while, I learned that it's more about what's in the textbooks. I learned that developing the right attitude to serve in the military was very important. Anybody can come in and kind of do the numbers and kind of pass the test, but to become really devoted into your military service, you got to get in your psyche, and you got to work with these folks and motivate them to do the best that they can do. And so I find myself after class hours, I go out, and of course, physical fitness was a big thing. I go out and running with our students, and very few people chose to do that, but I did. And we had developed a special trust and a bond with the students, and so if they had issues, they'd come talk to me about it. One story I had was a young man in there. He was doing really good, and then all of a sudden he started doing very poorly on his tests. And I was able to take him off to the side. I said, well, what's going on here? You're doing really well, and now you're kind of slipping. And he says, well, this Air Force stuff just isn't for me. I just don't want to do it anymore and get out. And I said, what are your plans? And he says, well, my uncle owns a landscaping business. I'm just going to go out there and help him do landscaping. I said, are we talking like putting mulch on trees and that type of thing? Oh, no, it's big business. He's got heavy equipment to operate and some things like that. And I said, well, you understand that the training you're getting right now could be adapted into working on that heavy equipment. And you can use the skills that you're developing here to go help your uncle, but you'll be a bigger help to him once you've been trained and you learn how to work on this stuff, and then you can really be a real asset to him. His eyes got big and started looking at me. And he says, wow, I never really thought of it that way. And the kid came back and started attending the classes and just started acing every test. It wasn't in his ability, it was in his mental attitude. And when he got ready to graduate, I don't know why I didn't pick up on this before. Well, his last name was different somehow than his father's or the man he was living with, but I knew his father from when I was stationed at Ellsworth Air Force Base. So it's neat how the connections work out there. I could tell you stories all day long about kids I've worked with and the good feeling you get from working with kids and helping them that light bulb to come on and things to happen. But my 4-year assignment, becoming an instructor, it was coming to an end. I needed to move on. And next I moved all the way up to Alaska, Elmendorf Air Force Base, and we spent 4 years there and absolutely loved it. By now, my rank was such that you had just a little bit of responsibility underneath yourself. At one point, I was managing a $52 million equipment account, feeling pretty powerful, but it's just part of the job, really. But I was also selected to go on a couple of temporary duty assignments while I was up there. We went to India on, well, I had to go 2 different times. First time, I went as an ambassador, a diplomatic team, to help set up for the upcoming exercise we were preparing for. And if you ever get a chance to go as an ambassador to the United States government to India, you don't want to pass that up. You are treated like royalty. You walk in and everything is just laid out for you. It's just a fantastic feeling. They put you up in 5-star hotels and treat you right. Like Scott said, Air Force is treated right. They took good care of us over there. I do have to share one funny story of the India experience. As good as it was, and the people were very friendly and they welcomed us in there. But they put us on a plane. We were flying from Delhi. We're going down to Agra where the Taj Mahal is. And they put us on this old, I still want to say it old, it looked old, aircraft, the old twin turboprop airplane with the jump seats on the side. And I'm looking at all the other passengers, and they had the same look on their faces as me, like, what is going on? Every time I've ever prepared any cargo, no matter how small it was, you made sure it was secured and strapped down and tight anytime you moved anything. On this one, we took our luggage aboard, We threw it in the middle. They had a cargo net there. The flight attendant, I'm going to call him that, he takes the cargo net and throws it over the top, and then he brings us our juice, which comes in a little box. And as we start the taxi, we're getting ready to take off, and all of a sudden the theme song from Indiana Jones just starts playing through my head. So I didn't know what was going to happen, but the flight went off without any incident. We safely arrived over to the Taj Mahal, where we were able to tour that and see that. So that was a pretty fantastic trip there as well. Closer to the end of my time at Elmendorf, I was just happened to be in the shop one day when this tsunami hit Indonesia, and they needed a volunteer right away to head down there. So I raised my hand and said, "Yeah, I'll go help those people out. They need food and water." And I think I had to leave the next day. And of course, getting there was not so easy because a lot of people wanted to get down there and help right then. So the logistics of it was not the greatest, and our plane broke on the way over there, so we were stuck in Tokyo a couple days. But eventually we got there and we were able to do our missions and fly that food and water up to Banda Aceh. And that was a big deal. The military, the Air Force, all the military is very humanitarian oriented. We do some pretty tough things when we need to as well, but there's always about taking care of humankind. And I think that's something that kind of resonates throughout all the military branches. Shows we do have a heart. Of course, I couldn't make my tour complete without a little trip over to the Persian Gulf and help supporting Iraqi freedom and enduring freedom, what's going on in Afghanistan. All I can say is they're hitting it hard every day, holidays included. We have to keep them in our thoughts, the troops in our thoughts all the time, because they're keeping the fight over there instead of letting somebody bring it to us. And that's all a part of our national security. And the young people we have out there that replace my spot and these other gentlemen's spots along there, I'd like to honor them tonight and keep them in our thoughts, especially here on Veterans Day, because we need a bunch of young people that can step up and take those positions as well, because nobody can do it forever. So my time in the military was a wonderful, wonderful time. I certainly couldn't touch on all the details of everything I've done in 20 years here in 10 minutes or however long it's been. Bill's falling asleep? No, okay. But anyway, thank you for being here this evening, and thank you for your time. Next, I'd like to introduce Mr. Bill J.
I want to start off with, I'm still living in the house I was born in June 26, 1931. And so I haven't moved around much, but my military career was great. I wouldn't want to do it again, but I got to see foreign countries and take cruises, only they wasn't too pleasant. I'll start off with, I graduated from Melton School here in 1950. And we had a German exchange student named Dieter Gotthard. And he happened to be my roommate on our senior trip. And every morning when we was in Washington, Jay, get up. Let's go see if we can see President. I said, you're crazy, you know. But we got up and we go stand on the sidewalk in front of the Capitol, and the president was staying in the Blair House at that time. So we went there 2 mornings and no president. But the third morning was a charm. 2 security people come out and started walking down the street, and then 3 more come out, and then 2 followed up. And it was President Truman, and we stood there, and as we got there, they got close to us. He stopped and said, "How, your boys are kind of out here early, aren't you?" And we said, "Yeah, we was out here yesterday and the day before, but we didn't get to see you." And he said, "Well, where are you boys from?" And I said, "Well, I live just north of Dayton, Ohio, in West Melton. And he said, son, where are you from? And Dieter said, I'm from Berlin, Germany. And he said, well, how'd that happen, you know? And so he explained, but after a while you'll realize why I'm telling this part. So anyway, I graduated in 1950. June of that year, the Korean War broke out. Well, I was supposed to get a job at NCR, but when I went down to talk to them about it, they said, well, Bill, you're going to be drafted for the Korean conflict, so we don't want to hire you right now. So I waited a year and a couple months before I got the greetings from your friends and neighbors. We have selected you to serve our country. And I kind of had mixed emotions on it, but Jerry Carnes was another guy from here in town. And we went to Cincinnati, and they give us shots there. And then we went to Fort Meade, Maryland. And then they sent us to Indian Count Gap, Pennsylvania. Well, when we was at Fort Meade, the sergeant said we was in one big long line. And he said, you fellows that like to be in the Marine Corps, take one step to the left. You fellows that want to be a paratrooper, take one step to the right. And the rest of you guys that can't make up your friggin' mind, you're in the Army. March forward. So, like I said, we went to Indian Count Gap, Pennsylvania for 8 weeks of rifle training, bazooka, throwing grenades, and camping out. And one of my stories there was I was in the Boy Scouts when I was here in town, and the pine trees, a lot of the needles would fall off, and the ground was really soft with pine needles. Well, the ravines had pine needles a lot deeper, so a bunch of the guys pitched their tents in those ravines. And I told them, if it rains, you guys are going to get wet. No, it's not going to rain. Well, that night we had one hell of a cloud burst, and it washed their tents and their canteens and everything down into this river. And but I put mine up where it was on a knoll, and I just carried some pine needles up and put them there, and rather than going to where they fell, you know. But shooting a bazooka in the rain wasn't pleasant, because I looked at my buddy after and his face was just nothing but blood. But them raindrops come back and hit you with such a force that it just made your skin bloody. And our last week there, we threw grenades. And I was one of the last guys to go up on the line and throw grenades. And it was getting on the bus, or the bus to go back to the barracks, and the sergeant said, "Oh, heck, we got another case of grenades here we got to get rid of." And I said, "Can't we just take them back?" "No, we got to get rid of them." Well, our hands were so cold that when you pull the pin, you couldn't even tell. And one of the guys dropped one, and I thought, uh-oh. But the sergeant picked it up, and he throwed it, and it went off in midair. And I thought, man, them things are really dangerous. But then we left Indiantown Gap on a train, and they're sending us to Fort Bliss, Texas. So I'm sitting in the car, in the railroad car, and looking out the window, and we passed Route 48 in Covington. And I got up and run back to the conductor, and I said, "Did we just go through Covington, Ohio?" And he said, "Yeah, our next stop's Greenville." He said, "We're going to be there 10, 15 minutes picking up mail and stuff." And I thought, Man, I wish I'd have known that yesterday. I could have called my parents and told them to come up, and I could at least say hi. And but it seemed like it was took us 2 or 3 days on train to get to El Paso, and that's where Fort Bliss is. And it's nothing but no bliss, I'll tell you, to be there. But you get up in the morning, and your canteen, when we was out on bivouac, your canteen would be solid ice. And by 10 o'clock in the morning, it'd be 85, 90 degrees. So you couldn't dress in the morning to stay warm, or just, it didn't work out for you. And they told us, we went on bivouac out in the desert, and they said, well, you're not allowed to take any cookies, candy bars, or anything like that. But they didn't tell us why. So most of us had cookies and candy bars. You know, we're not going to be deprived of our good stuff to eat. Well, in the middle of the night, I felt something in my sleeping bag with me, and desert rats. I said, you know, all of us was getting up and shaking our sleeping bags out because of these rats. I had 2 of them in with me, and I thought, man, I wish they'd have said, you know, the reason we don't want you to take any candy or cookies, the rats like them. But and while I was at Fort Bliss, our last week of basic, we had quad 50s and 90 millimeters and British pom-pom guns, and that was what they was using on the front lines in Korea. And so everybody that graduated from the basic training there, you was going to Korea. Well, the last week of our basic, this master sergeant come back from Korea, and he had a big scar on his cheek and his forearm and in the calf of his leg. He showed us these scars. Said, I'm here to teach you boys rifle butt and bayonet. And I went, dear God, don't send me there, you know. Well, we was out there on the parade ground, and like I said, it was just a formality thing. But while we was standing there at ease, and the colonel was calling off the orders, a captain come out and handed him a piece of paper. And he said, okay, the next names I call off fall out over here on this blacktop strip. Hildebrand, that was Red Hildebrand, lived in Ludlow, and Jay, I thought. And they picked out like 200 of us out of that basic training group. And we didn't know what the deal was. Well, about 2 weeks later, we found out that the Pentagon had activated the 717 New Mexico National Guard unit that was stationed right there at Fort Bliss. And when they'd have a shipment and needed 5 or 10 guys, they'd go to this guard outfit and say, we got any volunteers to go to Korea? Well, the only kids that was in that outfit that was left was 17-year-old boys that wasn't old enough to be sent to Korea. So I lucked out that way. But so the Pentagon, activated the Guard unit. I think the biggest part of our troops over there are guardsmen now. But back then, it had to be an act of Congress before a Guard unit could go into a war zone. So anyway, we went into this Guard unit, and when they'd say, New Mexico National Guard Unit, all the guys was from Ohio, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and we had a few from Michigan, which kind of made us odd ducks, you know. And they said, we're shipping you out as a unit, so we had to cosmoline and prepare all of our equipment for putting on a ship in New Orleans and shipping out of the Gulf and across. And we didn't anymore get out into the high seas. Hurricane. I think 98% of us was seasick for a week. And we had the 28th Hospital Division on with us. And we got to Le Havre, France. And the guys in the hospital division said, well, you suckers are going up to Germany. We're going to move into a new hospital that the French are building us. Well, so they got off, and my first sergeant come, Jay, you been gold bricking? I said, sir, I was sick. He said, well, I did notice he was kind of green around the gills. He said, I want you to report to the third electrician in the ship's quarters. So I went down to the ship's third electrician. He said, come in. He said, as soon as I get done shaving here, we'll go eat breakfast. Well, my commanding officers would have loved to have this job. We go down to the mess hall, and he hands me a menu. And I've been eating green eggs and ham and stuff like that, you know, on the trip, what you could keep down. Everything would come up, and they'd say, well, you got to keep eating because you don't want to get the dry heaves, because that's worse than anything. So anyway, when we left there and went to Bremerhaven and got off the ship, and they sent us to Karlsruhe, Germany. And we really lucked out there because our barracks was like our old high school building, brick building. It was the home of the SS troops, was Hitler's elite. So they had, everything was really neat as far as the barracks. The only thing that was, when we got in the train station, there wasn't any roof on it, and all the I-beams and everything had bullet holes through it, and all I could think of, man, these people are going to hate our guts, you know, what we did to them. There was a ball bearing factory there that in the middle of the Karlsruhe, and we just bombed the heck out of it. But I was really amazed at the people in the community. We could get on a streetcar and ride downtown Karlsruhe as long as you had your uniform on, step on it, get off where you wanted to, no cost. But about a third of the town was all that was left standing. But while I was there, in a year and a half, they pretty well rebuilt a lot of it. But when I was we'd go up to the Baltic Sea, and we'd fire at sleeves with our 90 millimeters. And if we put a hole in a sleeve, well, then you got to have that sleeve, and you made slip covers out of it. It was pretty orange, so you made slip covers out and put it in your truck seats and stuff like that. But we would get guys that come back from Korea. They'd send them stateside and then send them over to us, and they'd volunteer right away. Well, this is like the Boy Scouts. We want more action, so they'd volunteer to go back to Korea. But that first sergeant, when I thought, man, he told us that, like at 10, 2, and 4, like Dr. Pepper, the one that taught us bayonet training, and he said that at 10, 2, and 4, they would come at you in waves, And he said, we just mow them down. He said their philosophy was that if they got killed on the battlefield, that they was going to have all the concubines and everything be milk and honey for them. And so they was eager to get killed on the battlefield. And he said they'd be 50 to 150 come at us, and he said then they'd give us a couple hours to get our weapons back and ammunition up and everything. And that's when I said, man, I don't. But they got overrun one day. He said there was another group come about 5 o'clock and overrun their position. And he said, I was the only one that survived. And he said, if you would moan or groan when they was walking on you, they just shoot you in the head. And that's how he just said, I said, dear God, don't let me moan or groan. And when they walked on him, and he said, as soon as I seen that they was going out of my eyesight one way, he said, I started crawling the other direction, and that's how he got back to his lines. And he said that he was the only one that survived that attack. And that's the reason he was there, to teach us rifle, butt, and bayonet. But anyway, in Germany, we go out, get out on a nice warm bed, and go out and dig foxholes in farmers' fields and set up gun emplacements and stuff like that. And but I did get to, I had, coming from a small town, I didn't know I was supposed to hate the black guys in the outfit and the Jews, like most of the guys shunned them. And I made friends with them, which was probably the best deal of my whole life, because if I had KP one day and guard duty the following day, the two black guys would shine my shoes, shine my brass, press my pants, and really take care of me. 'Cause I think I was the only one in the room that, treated them equal. And all the Jewish kids had battery clerk, supply sergeant. They had all those jobs. So I did get to go to Paris, and I met a French boy that was on a train. We thought he was an officer's son, and so we didn't want to go see him. But after about a week, we got bored with Goodman's uncle, left us have his apartment, and we went and seen this French kid. And when the Americans liberated Paris, a sergeant stayed there with his mother and sister, and she said, I know what you boys like. She said, we're going to have Southern fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and gravy. And I thought, man, that would really be neat. And then she had chocolate pudding at the boot. But so I got to go another time to see them, and they had this was 1953, and they had a 53 Plymouth, brand new. I thought, man, they must be wealthy because you have a foreign car. But anyway, I served my 2 years in Germany, and I got to go to Holland in the springtime. And like we have cornfields here and soybean fields, there was red tulips and yellow ones, and the hyacinths is what was really bad, because you know how one hyacinth smells. Well, you can imagine what a 50-acre field of them smells like. But when my time was up, I got on another ship, to come home, and one morning I was sergeant of the guard, so I got to post the guards and picked my post, and I went up on deck, and captain come by and said, "Jay, you see that little speck back there over the fantail?" I said, "Yeah, what is that?" And he said, "Yeah, about 2 hours and a half, you'll see." And sure enough, 2 hours went by, and it was a USS United States, the liner ship. And that was really something. I thought I had my thumb up. I wanted to get on that because I knew that it was going to get home a week before what we would. But anyway, about two days later, we was barely moving. And I said, "Is our engine bad, Captain?" He said, "No, Jay." He said, "Well, I might as well tell you." He said, "There's a hurricane coming." And he said, "I thought if I cut our speed, we'd miss the eye." And I said, "Oh, dear God, please do." But he brought out a Hornets for me for a couple days later and said, "Do you see all them little islets around the ship?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, have one of your clips in those islets because the waves are going to start sweeping the deck." And he said, if any of the lifeboats get loose," he said, "between swells," he said, "sometimes you have 2 or 3 minutes." He said, "I can have the crew come and secure it." Well, the waves kept getting bigger and bigger, and the doorways, are offset so you could step back in them and not get washed overboard. And that morning, they kept getting bigger and bigger, and boy, one huge wave come, and I opened up and I got the salt water out of my eyes so I could see, and there was just pulleys hanging where our lifeboat was before. And I had a little speaker box there that I called in and said, "Motor launch 32 and 34 is going." He said, "Completely?" I said, "Yeah, there's just a couple boards hanging there on the hooks." He said, "Well," he said, "I hope our boat don't." I said, "You didn't need to tell me that." But he was even sick. He said he'd been in the Navy 28 years, and that was the first time he ever was seasick. But the best sight was coming into New York Harbor and seeing the Statue of Liberty there in front of us, and fire boats was blowing their whistles and shooting water up in the air, and went back to Fort Meade. I was 135 pounds when I went into the Army, but being seasick, and I got up to 157 in Germany, and when I got weighed in at Fort Meade, Maryland, 135. So all the weight I gained, I lost. That's it.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. This has been most interesting. We've enjoyed hearing about your experiences in the service, and we thank you very much for your time, and we thank you most of all for your time in the service and for serving our country. Thank you very much. Good night.
Was that too long?